All right, thank you all for joining us today. We have a great webinar in store for you, and there's a lot of information to get to, so I will keep my introduction brief. I'm Mike Kupfer with Franchise Business Review, and our panelist, our moderator rather, today will be Eric Stites, company CEO. And our webinar is 5 tips for overcoming analysis paralysis. We're going to take about 30 minutes on this webinar. Eric's going to go through a lot of content with you. I do encourage you to ask your questions as we go along. What we like to do is take some questions as they come in, if they're pertaining to the topic that we're discussing, and anything else we're going to save until the end. We'll do a quick Q&A to make sure we get your questions answered. We will have a copy of the slides available afterwards for anybody who wants that. We usually get a few requests for those as well. So I don't want to take any more of your time, but Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 5 tips on overcoming analysis paralysis here when you're looking at franchisee satisfaction survey results. As Mike mentioned, I'm Eric Stites with Franchise Business Review. I founded the company back in 2005, and we've been doing a lot over the last 12 years with franchisee satisfaction. So want to jump in. As Mike mentioned, want to keep this as interactive as possible today. So if I say anything that you don't understand, if you have questions along the way, just type those in and we'll get them answered as quickly as possible. Again, we want to just make sure everybody leaves learning a little bit of something about how to get more from their satisfaction survey results. So the slide I'm showing right now actually looks like a great piece of artwork, but this is actually a graphical representation of one of our surveys. It's pretty interesting when you look at it in color. The rows each represent a franchisee, and each column represents one of 33 of our benchmark questions from our satisfaction survey. And the reason I put this up, we don't give clients survey results like this, although it would be pretty cool to hang one of these in your office. But this is a survey of 50 franchisees. So there's 50 rows there, and again, 33 columns. And that gives you over 1,600 data points. So again, even a small system with 50 franchisees, when you do a survey, there is a lot of information in that results. And so what we want to do is kind of start, real basic. How do you get the most basic information from a survey, and then dig a little bit deeper? And we're going to talk a lot about Franchise Business Review's tools that we offer, but if you're not a client of FBR's, certainly you can use some of this information for internal surveys as well, and we can also talk about how we can provide benchmarking information to help you for those internal surveys. Again, this is mostly about franchisee satisfaction surveys, but a lot of this can be applied to customer satisfaction surveys, employee surveys, even candidate surveys, all of which we do. And really the goal is to help you get as much information from any survey that you're doing as possible. So where I like to start when I talk to a client is I like to ask the question, what's your FSI? And FSI is what we call Franchisee Satisfaction Index. It's an index that we came up with about 5 years ago based on all the research that we've done. Again, we've been doing this for over 12 years. We've looked at over 1,000 brands. We've surveyed 400,000 franchisees in that time period. And so there's a lot of data that goes into a franchisee satisfaction index. And so what we do is we provide an overall score for any company that surveys with us. That's their FSI score overall. And then each question breaks down with its own individual FSI. And so understanding that Franchisee Satisfaction Index, what's behind it, and what it means is kind of a great place to start. So when we look at our data, again, you can picture a bell curve of all the franchise systems out there. The average FSI score, the median, I should say, FSI score falls right at about a 70, a little bit 70, 70.2, 70.3. So when we talk about where you fall, what does that overall FSI score actually mean? That gives you at least an idea of where to start. So a 70 is about average. Our top quartile companies are in the 78, upwards of low 90s range. Our bottom quartile companies go down as low as a 35 FSI. So at least when you get that initial FSI score, you have some idea of where you fall, and that gives you a quick kind of indicator. But you really want to dig much deeper once you start to dig into that information and find out a little bit more from there. So this is our typical analytics screen, and what it allows all of our clients to do is to select their survey, look at benchmark information so they can choose a benchmark that they want to compare to. Most companies will compare themselves to our FBR benchmark, which is an aggregate of all the companies that we survey. And then you can also provide, you can also look at industry benchmarks as well. So if you want to look at the food segment, if you want to look at QSR, for instance, we can drill down a little bit deeper. But this information across the top shows you that there were 200 completed surveys. The FSI was a 68.7, and this is based on 67% of franchisees participating. So the overall FSI on this survey is just slightly below benchmark. And then you can see the blue and gray bars there. The blue bars represent this client survey and how that compares to the benchmarks in the major categories, so training and support, franchise system, leadership, and so on. Down the right-hand side, you can quickly see where your highest and lowest areas are. So when you look at, again, those survey results and you start to dig in, that's generally where we'd like to start. Where are your franchisees rating you the highest, and where are you rating the lowest? And you really want to kind of then from there dig in a little bit deeper to find out exactly what's going on in those areas. When we look at the next stage, it's looking at our scorecard. And what this does is this breaks down every question in our survey. Again, you can see going across for the first one there, effective technology. The dark blue and light blue responses are the most positive responses. Gray is neutral, and yellow and red being the negative responses. And you can see the FSI there being a 54.3, and I apologize for some of you that may be very small on your screen, and how that compares to the benchmark on that specific question. And then the last column there is the variance. So that shows you the difference between your score and the benchmark. And this is actually sorted by variance. So you can go in, sort by variance, and again, very quickly see those areas where your franchisees are rating you either the highest or lowest compared to the benchmark that you're comparing to. And this gives you, a good sense of, okay, where are some of the initial areas that I want to, pay attention to. From there, you can certainly drill down question by question and look at the breakout of responses for any question in the survey, and look at how many average responses were there for each of those, and what the FSI score overall was, and so that kind of gives you an overall fairly quick analysis of how you did in the survey. What I like to do, and many of our clients stop there. They get their overall FSI score. They look at 4 or 5 problem areas, places that they're having challenges, and they want to work on those, and that's about all the digging that they do. And what I encourage clients to do is at least look at breaking out your data by franchisee tenure, as well as the number of units. If you have multi-unit owners in your system, look at the data for multi-unit owners separately from single-unit owners, and just look and see if there's any variances there. Our analytics system allows anybody to go in and filter based on any question in the survey. And again, you can go in and select if you want to look at people that own 3 or more units. You can easily do that and look at those results. It's very interesting to me how the data can vary from survey to survey over time, looking at franchisee tenure as well as, again, the single unit owners versus the multi-unit owners. And not that one is necessarily more important than the other, but you want to understand the differences in your system and how that may affect the training and support that you're providing. Certainly a 5-unit or more owner is going to have different demands and needs than a single-unit franchisee that's only been in business for a few years. So those are some of the key areas you want to keep in mind when you're looking at your survey results. The next thing I like to do is read through all the open text questions or the feedback from franchisees on those open text questions. I think if you ask any of our clients or anybody that has done a survey, that's really where the gold comes from in any the survey results that you get is the feedback that you get from your franchisees. In our case, we allow the franchisee to choose whether they want to be anonymous or not. Many will share their identity, so you'll get this report with their name attached if they did provide their name. And that's a really good tool. We'll talk about how to use that for following up with franchisees at the later date. But reading through those comments and really taking the time to see what all your franchisees are saying about the different areas is really important, and also important that you then follow up with your franchisees and just let them know, thanks for your feedback. We really appreciate that. So what I want to do is move into sharing some of the data with franchisees. But before I do that, I just want to pause real quickly to see if there's any questions related to the survey portion. Mike, just want to make sure that we haven't missed anything yet.
Eric, we do have one question that came in where one of our clients actually is asking, they've used our survey once in the past and they were pleasantly surprised with the results. And now they're doing it again and they're a little apprehensive about the results this time. They haven't gotten them yet. And do you find that satisfaction typically decreases or increases over time?
Great question. It really depends on what's going on in your system. We don't see any pattern that satisfaction decreases over time, especially from surveying. Actually, what we tend to see for clients that are using the survey very effectively, and that's kind of a great lead into sharing the data with your franchisees, because systems that do share data with their franchisees and communicate back to their franchisee community throughout the year about various programs that are the result of franchisee feedback from the annual survey. We do tend to see those systems increase satisfaction over time. So, again, it depends. If a system hasn't surveyed in a while, they may see a dip in satisfaction. But for clients that are using it effectively and doing it on an annual basis, and really just talking to franchisees about how important it is to provide that feedback, we do see that they see slight improvements year over year, and and some of those are fairly significant improvements depending on what's going on in the system. As I mentioned, with our system, we leave it up to the franchisee whether or not they want to be anonymous. And so if a franchisee does provide their name, you'll get a report card on each individual franchisee. And this is a great tool for your field support team to sit down one-on-one with each franchisee and go through their feedback. Again, whether it's positive or negative, you want to thank the franchisee for sharing their feedback and sharing their concerns, whatever it may be, and it just helps that relationship, especially with the field ops person and the franchisee working one-on-one, to say, hey, they are actually listening, they're using this stuff, and that will, help response rates and encourage franchisees to participate in future surveys as well. The worst thing you can do is do a survey and not share the results back with the franchisees, because they'll, they just won't think that you're using the information, and we see companies that have done that where they just see declining franchisee response rates over the years. And so you want to make sure that you get back with franchisees on that. One great best practice that we do a lot of and encourage clients to do a lot of is to do brainstorming sessions with franchisees This can be done at your annual meeting. This can be done at regional meetings. Whenever you're getting together face-to-face with franchisees, take those 5 top areas where challenge areas from the survey results, and have your franchisees brainstorm solutions and share those back with the group. It just helps get the franchisees engaged in the process and really own those solutions. And a lot of the ideas that your franchisees come up with aren't very different from what you would come up with at the corporate office, but because the franchisees own it and go through this process, they'll be much more likely to be receptive to any change that might be implemented in the system. We actually just had a client that did a similar thing, but they also did a Shark Tank with franchisees and encouraged their franchisees to bring ideas to the table at their annual conference. And the winner got $25,000 for the best idea. And what they ended up doing is they did pick a winner, but they're going to implement all 4 finalist ideas in their system. And again, it just goes to show you and show your franchisees that you care, you're listening, you're implementing their feedback. Certainly there's things that will come up in the survey that franchisees want that you aren't willing to provide, and that's fine as long as you get back to them and say, we saw that you asked for this and we can't do that, and here's why. Franchisees know that at the end of the day the franchisor has to make the decision, but again, as long as they see that you're listening and involving them in the process, they'll be much more engaged and much more likely to implement any changes that come through your system. So I just want to talk a little bit about deeper analytics and take a little bit deeper dive in some of the things that you can get out of looking a little bit deeper into the data. And again, I don't expect that any of you are big analytics people, and certainly this is something that we can do for our clients if they request, or if you've got somebody on your team that's good at looking a little bit deeper into the survey data and really kind of understanding what's going on. But one of the first things that we like to do is plot franchisee satisfaction over the franchisee tenure. So, and Greg Nathan, many of you probably have seen Greg Nathan speak at IFA conferences before. He wrote a book called The E Factor years ago. Greg is based in Australia and runs Franchise Relationships Institute. And pretty much every franchise system has a curve like this. Now, if you can picture on the left there, that's kind of day one when a franchisee joins the system. And satisfaction at that point has no place to go but down. That's when the realities of business set in. And it may be grand opening, it may be training, it may be all this other stuff. They're drinking from the fire hose, and satisfaction tends to go down. In some systems goes down very sharply. And then hopefully over a period of time we bottom out here. It typically can take a year, maybe 2, where the franchisee finally kind of gets it and understands what franchising is all about, and that you're working together, and they get to that kind of we stage, and they start to come back. So understanding that curve in your system, every system has a slightly different curve, can be very important to talk, when you're talking to your franchisees. And again, it's all about setting expectations. And this is also a great topic. We're going to talk a little bit about how to use data with franchisee candidates. This is a great thing to talk to franchisee candidates about, because again, this helps set that expectation from day one. So, year one, year 1.5, year 2, when they're really working 80 hours a week and not seeing a whole lot of money yet and feeling really frustrated, you can kind of go back to this and be like, oh yeah, they told me about that. And and again, obviously you can model your support around this curve, because as franchisees move through this life cycle, obviously their support needs change. But then you can also take that, and in this chart, this is actually the size of the ball represents the size of the franchisee's business. So the big blue balls are bigger businesses. The smaller balls are obviously smaller revenue, and this is by revenue. And this is plotted over time to renewal. So the ones on the left are the ones that are closest to renewal, and the ones on the right are farther from renewal. And then the satisfaction ranges on the left as well. So those, again, at the left top side of the screen, those are very satisfied, coming up for renewal. A lot of small ones up there. And what you see here is this group of 4 or 5 big balls down at the bottom. These are some very big franchises that are coming up for renewal in the next few years that probably aren't going to renew. And that business represents about 1/3 of this franchise system. That's a good thing to know, certainly as the CEO or anybody within any franchise system, what's going on. And again, when you look at satisfaction as a whole and aggregate, things may look pretty good, but when you look at it at this level, you're like, oh my gosh, you've got 1/3 of your royalties on the line in the next few years. So you better get, on the stick and figure out what's going on with those people. This is a similar view, and what we've done here is we've actually taken the area developer into account here. So the different color variations are 2 different area developers. So the big blue balls that are up high, most of the blue are up fairly high and fairly satisfied, with a few exceptions of some little ones. But there's some very large orange franchisees that are very dissatisfied with the business. And this could be a reflection of the area developer not providing the same level of support across your system, and understanding that the geographical variations, the variations with your support from person to person is critical with any survey. So I want to talk a little bit about sharing the data with candidates. I mentioned it before. I mean, talking about that franchisee life cycle is critical. Spending a few minutes just talking about what franchising is all about to your franchisee candidates before they sign on the dotted line is obviously very important. Setting the expectations, sharing survey results. I encourage franchisors to share as much detail as possible from their annual surveys with franchisee candidates. Certainly, you don't want to, day one, hit them with it. You can talk about the importance of franchisee satisfaction, and that you measure franchisee satisfaction across your system on a regular basis. And when they become a franchisee, their input is going to be very valuable. And then as they move through the development process and are a very serious candidate, you can start sharing more details from the survey. I mean, we have a lot of clients that actually will invite their franchisee candidates into the back end of our system and go through the data with them, and they can drill down even to the individual franchisee level if they want. And it really helps, again, educate that candidate with the reality of what's going on in the system. They're going to hear it when they do their validation calls anyway. So if there's some challenge going on in your system that you don't want your candidates to know about, I mean, they're going to hear the good, the bad, the ugly from your franchisees. So it's better that they hear it from you first, and then when they hear it from the franchisees, they're going to be like, oh yeah, they mentioned that at corporate, and they told me what they're doing about that. And we've actually had a lot of clients use their satisfaction data, even when it's not that good, as a validation tool to really help take the pressure out of the sales process, and it helps flush out who the real candidates are. And you can see when someone's doing their research and doing their due diligence, and they're serious about it, obviously they're a very serious candidate. We encourage people to use the franchisee satisfaction survey as their first step in validation. So let them go in and look at the data and talk to you about what questions they have, and that's a great way, rather than just setting them loose on your network and calling franchisees. It's good to have them get educated with the issues first, and then they can make some more targeted phone calls. Again, and when they talk to franchisees and hear certain things, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know about that, and they can get clarification at that point. But it just helps get, one, it takes pressure off the sales process, but it also helps that candidate be more focused they'll make fewer phone calls, and they'll be more targeted phone calls, and be more, I guess, accepting of your franchisee's time, and not spending an hour on a phone call with a franchisee. The other thing I mentioned is, in the franchise industry, obviously there is, I like to call it the recruiting process. Obviously, it is a sales process. There is a bit of salesmanship associated with awarding a franchise, but you really got to be realistic about your system, and understand that candidates are kind of coming into this process, and they're drinking from the fire hose. They're getting information from a lot of different sources, and you really want to help set those expectations at a realistic place. And a lot of franchisors do item 19s now, for instance, but we spend a lot of time massaging those item 19s to look really, really good. And again, I understand that you need to have them look good to be a good sales tool, an effective sales tool, but presenting the whole picture and talking through that whole picture with candidates is important. So just to give you an example, I mean, of all the research that we do, one of the questions we ask is the annual pre-tax income of a franchisee. So the average income of a franchisee is $90,000, a little bit over. But the median income is much lower. And so a lot of people will use average numbers in their item 19s because they look better. And they're inflated because of your your few top performers that are pulling that number up. When the median in the most likely scenario of a franchisee candidate could be very different. So again, if I'm a candidate and my expectation is set that I'm going to make $90,000 in your business, but the reality is I'm going to come in and more than likely I'm going to be making closer to 60, 65, that can be a huge barrier to overcome over time. And it's, when someone's expectations are out of alignment, it's very hard to turn that person around, especially when it comes to financial figures. So I encourage you to share as much financial information as possible. I encourage, I really like some of the new item 19s that people are doing that really bring it all the way down to a net number as opposed to just gross sales, because gross sales don't really tell me a whole lot. Companies like Brightstar, Wild Birds, Unlimited, Fast Signs, they have great examples of item 19s that really show what the income potential is for the owner, and they'll show it on an aggregate basis with a large sample, and they obviously they show the top performers and the average performers, and they, I'm sure, spend a lot of time talking about their top performers, and everybody thinks they're going to be a top performer. But again, having that information about average performance and median performance is really important as far as setting expectations. So I know we're running up here on the end of the half hour, so I want to open up for questions as much as possible. But what I want to do is I want to just give a couple of quick tips on a couple of tools that I think can be very helpful for people. One company out there is a company called ProfitKeeper. So if you're not doing financial benchmarking today, that's what they specialize in, and you can connect financial information, financial benchmark information from your franchisees to their franchisee satisfaction data as well. So again, if you're not, there's other companies out there that do financial benchmarking, but I highly recommend using that information, getting that information. ProfitKeeper is one company that does it. Another company, Zoracle, does a lot of franchisee and candidate performance predicting using different analysis of the individual and profiling of the individual. So that information is critical to have to understand who the top performers are in your system, and being able to predict if these candidates coming in now can measure up to that. And so understanding all of that, and again, looking at that data and comparing it to your satisfaction data, because a lot of times people think that their ideal candidate is XYZ, and the reality is that type of person 2-3 years in is very dissatisfied and very disengaged. And so you want to look at your satisfaction data over time and connect it with any kind of performance data or profiling data that you have as well to make sure that are we really predicting the right successful candidates coming into our system, and are that, is that flushing out, and are they becoming our most successful franchisees over time. Another company to check out is a company called Tableau. This company does analytics dashboards. They really help make data graphical. And whether you actually use Tableau or just kind of go to their site and check out how they present data, and some of that, they have some great samples of just how to present data. This is a great tool to really look at, again, help visualize your data and understand what's going on, and getting it out of the Excel spreadsheet and making it interactive and look, to get the story out of your data really. And they have some great examples. A lot of the things that we've done in our analytics dashboards have been influenced by some of the things that Tableau is doing. I think they're one of the leaders in this space. So I encourage you to check out Tableau, and ask all your vendors that are providing you with data to, not just spew it back in table form, but really help tell the story behind that data and help you get more insights out of it. So with that, I think we want to open up to some questions here, Mike, and I've just been babbling away, so I don't know what you may have for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, I think if you want to just flip over to the next slide, we should mention that we do have our annual Ops webinar series coming up in May. We have a whole bunch of great panelists, some first-time panelists, some repeats from previous panels that we've done. So definitely encourage anyone on this webinar to check that out as well. It's going to be a great help for you and your ops team. And yes, we do have a few questions to get to. I should mention that we are recording this, so if anybody is, we're a few minutes over, so if anybody needs to get going to a meeting or something, we will have this recorded and sent to you tomorrow. But let's get to the questions that we have, and if anybody has some more, feel free to send them on in. The first question I have for you, Eric, a two-part question, is what is a good time to institute the franchisee satisfaction survey? This is coming from somebody that has 21 franchise areas and 16 franchisees and is 3 years old as a system. So what would be a good time for them to institute the survey, and what type of response rate do we get?
Great question. Sooner the better. I mean, I get asked that a lot, and I don't care if you have 5 franchisees, 10 franchisees, however small your system is. It's never too soon to start an annual survey, and really, I mean, I get a lot of clients or prospective clients, I should say, well, I talk to my franchisees all the time. We've only got 5, or we've only got 10, or whatever the number is. I know everything. Why would I need to do a survey? And in the survey, what the survey does is, one, it just gives franchisees an opportunity to share independently from other conversations that you have with them. So, and what I mean by that is, there's a lot of things that a franchisee won't tell you, especially in a small system when they have a relationship typically with the founder CEO. They're afraid to maybe share some criticisms, which they're more likely to share in a survey. It's also just a great process to set up to say, look, we think there's nothing more important than your feedback and your opinions, and so we want to make sure that we've got this formal process in place. And again, you talk to your franchisees all the time. Even when you get up to several hundred, you're still probably talking to your franchisees all the time, and you know what's going on, you know what the issues are. But having that formal process, it's similar to the annual review for if you were an employee. And that's what I would say, regardless of the size of a company, you're still going to sit down with your employees every year and hopefully more frequently than that, and and have a formal process for them to provide feedback to you. And this is the same thing. And you can do it internally, certainly. I'm a little bit biased, certainly, but I think that doing it with a third party gives that a little bit more separation and opportunity for the franchisees to kind of speak their mind. And obviously, they can do it anonymously if they choose to. But there's no reason to wait. I would start as soon as possible.
Great. And as a follow-up to people who might be doing an internal survey already, are they able to benchmark the data that they're collecting themselves against the FBR benchmark data?
Absolutely, yeah. So anybody that's doing a survey now, we can share benchmark information with you, and what we'll do is we'll look at the questions that you ask, and obviously if they're not relatively similar, there's no way to do an apples-to-apples comparison. But for any questions that there is overlap on, we can provide benchmarking information and tell you, what the variation is between our benchmarks and what you may be seeing. And again, we can talk to you about your survey process and give you some tips and pointers on ways to improve that engagement as well.
Excellent. And one more on the franchisee satisfaction survey. How many questions and what time commitment is ideal for conducting a franchisee survey?
Great question. So our standard survey has 33 benchmark questions in it, and then there's another 15 or so general market and demographic questions. So the whole thing is just over 50 questions. They're multiple choice. It's pretty easy to run through our survey in about 10 or 15 minutes. If you are providing a lot of feedback, it may take a little bit longer than that. Each section has an open text question as well. Typically, what we recommend is that a company, add another 5 or 10 custom questions to that survey that are specific for their brand. More details about, specific marketing programs or things that are going on within your system. We have clients that will add, 5 or 10 questions. We have clients that add, 50 questions. I mean, we have one client that does an annual survey, and they have, I think, a total of 180 or 190 questions in their survey, and it's about an hour plus process for a franchisee to complete it. I don't recommend necessarily going that long, but again, if you're taking the process seriously and you're using the data and sharing it back with your franchisees, and they see that it's being used, I don't think that's too much to ask. Again, once a year, many franchise systems are surveying their franchisees all the time on specific issues. So, maybe marketing is sending out a survey, 1 week, and training is sending out, a survey another week. And so I think it's important to kind of wrap that in. And we just met with a client a couple weeks ago to kind of look at their whole survey strategically and their survey process, and just wrap that up all into one, so that you can get obviously franchise or survey fatigue if you're surveying your franchisees all the time and the different departments don't talk to each other. And so understanding that, I mean, somebody, whether you're doing surveys internally or whether you're doing surveys with a third party, somebody within the company needs to own that, and all surveys out to your franchisees. It may go through your communications department. If you're not that big and you don't have a communications department, it may be the COO or somebody in operations, but somebody needs to own all surveys and make sure that you're not over-surveying your franchisees. But certainly I would say, if you're doing an annual survey, to ask a franchisee to spend, 15, 20, 30 minutes, even up to an hour. I don't think, as long as they see you using the information, I think that you're going to see that that's successful. And there was a second part of that question. Was it participation rates, Mike?
No, just the time commitment, how long from start to finish.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think we're good.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so Eric, the last question that I will ask, and then we'll let people get back to work, is can you share income data from the survey with candidates? So is that something that you would advise people to do?
The income data, so we, as I mentioned earlier, we have the income question in our survey. And it's a good question because a lot of franchisors actually don't know how much money their franchisees are making. It sounds amazing, which is why I mentioned doing financial benchmarking and getting that information. A lot of franchisors know gross, but they don't necessarily know net. So having that information from our survey can be very valuable. As far as sharing that information with candidates, clearly from a legal standpoint, you can't share anything with candidates that's not in your item 19. So if it's in your item 19 and what you're saying to candidates is in line with that, then you're fine. But if you don't have an item 19 or your item 19 is gross sales and you're showing candidates profit information from our survey or a different survey, that could get you into trouble. So, again, just make sure that what you're sharing with candidates is in your FDD and consistent with your FDD, and you'll be fine. And certainly talk to your attorney about that. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think the best, some of the best item 19s that are out there right now, Fast Signs, Bright Star, Wild Birds Unlimited, those are 3 great examples to go check out. And if anybody wants a copy of those, just shoot me an email, and I can share those with you. But again, I think the more information you provide to candidates that's realistic and is representative of what your system can actually provide helps set those expectations right out of the gate.
All right, great. Eric, thank you. We're going to wrap it up there. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you got some great information out of this webinar. And again, I hope you'll check out our upcoming Ops webinar series. The address is right there on the bottom of your screen. You can be on the lookout for an email from us tomorrow, just with the recording for this session in case you want to check back and review anything. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or comments you might have about the content or our survey or anything else we might be able to help with. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Mike.